Hey everybody, welcome back to Author Etiquette. Today, I have the other side of the writing community. I have Tom Colgan, and he is senior editor, I believe, at Penguin Publishing. So if you read a book, or have read a book, you've probably read one that he's actually had interesting to. Tom Clancy, Mark Greaney, Robert Ludlum, Janet Avinovich, Don Bentley, Laura Childs. I mean, name it. He has probably been on that. I know I've read some of them. So he does good work because I was kept on interested in the book. So Tom, tell us about yourself and what kind of you go through on a day-to-day basis.
Hey, well, thank you for having me, first of all. I wouldn't usually say this because it sounds like I'm pumping myself up, but because you're going to ask me what I'm doing on a daily basis, I'm actually editorial director of Berkeley, which is an imprint of Penguin. The reason I bring that up is that the editorial director, one of my jobs is to supervise other editors. So senior editor just their own work, and I was the senior editor at one point. You just started doing your own work. But not only do I edit my own books, but I also supervise other editors who do part of our list. So the part of the list that I supervise, science fiction, fantasy, and mystery and thriller. Editors who do that report to me, and we work together.
Excellent.
What you want to really talk about is the editorial side of things, right?
Well, I want to talk about how did you even get into this? Were you an English major or you just like to read?
I was an English major, grew up here in New York, Queens. One of my more notable jobs was I worked at Shea Stadium on hot dogs and stuff. Not a vendor. I didn't go around. That's work. I actually worked at a booth. That's a hard job. So walking.
Was that the 68 Mets? Is that the crowd? The 68 Mets?
I was 7 years old in '69. So
you can't be selling no hot dogs. You eat hot dogs.
They say, I went to St. John's, which is in Queens, and a friend of mine was graduated, got a job here, and said, "Hey, there's an editor there who's looking for an assistant. You'd be interested?" When it was my turn to graduate, and I said, "Sure." I applied. I was an English major and English and history. I applied, got the job, and looked back. Just
excellent.
Really loved the work and loved the best job for me ever. Couldn't have had a better job. And I've been very lucky to work with great authors, very smart workers, and wonderful people. I can't tell you what, like, I can hardly think of anybody in publishing whom I don't really love. I just have had such a wonderful time way through.
I think most people just have their impression of a publishing company from Seinfeld. She's an editor and worked for the different publishing companies.
Who's in it? So I can't remember, but I do remember.
Pendant.
Pendant.
Right. Pendant. Yeah. I think because I just watched an episode. They say that they'll say they cure cancer before that goes out of syndication, which is amazing. So when you get, like, your editors, do they get a finished draft, or they get what kind of product do you initially see?
So mostly only take submissions from agents, right? An agent will send me a submission. I will read it, and we'll say, like, well, obviously have to like it. If I don't like it, forget it.
Yeah,
not doing it.
Right.
The question is not just do I like it, but do I like it and does it fit our list? The first things we say to new assistants is, not here to buy books you like, you're here to buy books that sell. Hopefully those two things coincide, right?
Right.
Now, later in my career, I've reached the point where I really only work on books that I like, categories that I like. But early in my career, very first job, aside from being an assistant, was it's a long story, so I'll keep it short, but I used to have a full-time editor who did nothing but Westerns.
Okay.
He left. And I went to my boss. I was an assistant at the time. I went to my boss and I said, "You have to give me the Western job. I love Westerns. I will do," and we did 7 a month. So I will do, like, anything to get this job because I love Westerns. Nobody else here likes Westerns. And, he gave me the job. Then on the way home, I stopped and bought the first Western I had ever read because I had lied my backside off. Never read a Western. Only ever watched The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Not a bad movie.
It's a great movie, but I had nothing about Westerns. So early in my career, I did stuff like that. I did a lot of nonfiction. I did a lot of did some science fiction. I did a whole bunch of stuff that's not really like my am. Now I've reached a point in my career where I can do the sort of thrillers that what I really love, right?
Yes.
So I've been very lucky in that regard. Anyway, so going way back to what we started talking about, we get a manuscript. I read it. I like it. I think it's right for our list. You can see what we're going to do with it. And I go to the editorial meeting on Tuesdays, and I say, hey, this guy sent me a manuscript. This agent sent me a manuscript. I really like it. Does anybody else want to take a look at it? Sometimes people do. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Depending on what it is, certain editors who are noted for stuff. So maybe that if it's a Tom Clancy-like book, it won't really need other people to look. If I like it, that'll be enough. If it's something a little more like a mystery, right? I do mysteries too. So if I get a mystery in, other people might be like, hey, I want to take a look at that too. Then we'll reconvene later in the week. Everybody liked it. People liked it. Some people didn't like it. And then we'll talk about what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it. If we don't like stuff about it, is there a way to fix that stuff? We'll have a conversation with the author and say, hey, I really liked your book, but, I don't know what, this secondary characters seem kind of weak, and it'd be more interesting if whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes the author will say, like, oh, that's really great. I think that's a good idea. I'd love to do that. And other times the author will say, no, I really like it the way it is.
Right.
Which, again, doesn't mean that we walk away. We don't just say, like, okay, well, that's it. You're not listening to me. I'm leaving. It's really more a conversation. And then we have to run numbers here. We do a profit and loss statement where we predict how the book's going to do based on other books. We call them comp titles. I say, like, oh, this comps well to Mark Greaney's Chaos Agent. We'll look at the numbers for the Chaos Agent, and then we'll use that as a basis to make an offer. And we just negotiate with the agent, and it's just the start. Then you have to do the whole editorial work and everything to get the book to, where everybody's happy with it. But that's the start of buying a book. Yeah.
I remember, I don't know how it even happened. I got a book in the mail, this was years ago, with a letter and said, would you like to read this from a technical perspective? We'll pay you $500. It was from Q Publishing. And so I said, yeah. So I did that. Then I started doing technical editing for them on the Microsoft Technology series, MCSE series. So I did all of those. Either I'd get a book that was already out, they wanted me to read it, make sure it was, anything changed, or I'd get a Word document. Then if there's any diagrams, that was extra. And I did that for probably, must have been 3 or 4 years. Then she said, hey, I got a book that looking for another author. Would you like to write a chapter? I was like, of course. I go, what is it on? She goes, oh, it's on Kerberos, which is security protocol. And I said, oh, I know all that. So I got done and signed the contract. I got done. I was like, what the hell is that? I called the guy that wrote the initial document on what it was. And I said, hey, if you'll help me, I'll send you a bottle of wine. But, I wrote the chapter on Kerberos. That was my co-author. I didn't do anything for a long time. But yeah, so that's just the start of it. Then you start really getting in and doing edits and all like that.
So there's two kinds of books. There's the kind that I just talked about where it comes as a full manuscript. You've read it. Still, there's editorial work to be done. There's always editorial work to be done. So, you go back to the author. We'll go through the whole manuscript. Mostly make my notes in the manuscript like we do it through track changes,
Yes.
Say, why would he say this here? Or, wouldn't it be better if, like, this other thing happened or whatever? And then again, have a conversation with the author. The author I'll always say, like, hey, my notes, give me a call, let's talk about it. Usually, it's always a pleasant conversation. Even when they disagree, it's a pleasant conversation.
Of course.
No one is saying, you must make this change. The second thing, remember I said the first thing we always tell people is, you're not here to buy books you like, you're here to buy books that sell. Second thing is, it's your book. It's you, the author's book. It's not my book.
Right. Right.
May come a time when you're insisting on something that is completely egregious that will keep us from publishing the book, but it's been almost 40 years for me, and that's never ever happened.
Okay.
I have absolutely been not at loggerheads. I've been directly opposed to some things in some books, and the author's like, "No, I want to do it this way." Okay, well, it's your book. If that's the way you want to do it, and that's the way we're going to do it.
I've got years of experience, but I'm good.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, listen, sometimes I'm right, and sometimes they're right.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
so then we have our back and forth. They make their changes. Then it goes to a copy editor. I'm not a copy editor. Like, I don't go through and say, take all the spelling and check the punctuation and check. While I'm going through it, if I see something, I'll correct it. I'm not going to leave it. But, that's not my job. Also, the copy editor makes the facts. Like, if you say, well, going back to the Westerns, if you say, hey, here's the Winchester, I don't know the number, but, this Winchester, the copy editor would say, well, that wasn't, put into production until 1898, and this book takes place in 1895,
Right.
So copy editor will do that. Copy editor also checks stuff that's, the one thing I always say to authors is, there's one thing I don't keep track of, it's the time. I find it impossible to keep track of. Copy editors are great at that. There'll always be a thing in almost every book we seem to do where, you say well, it's Tuesday afternoon, and then the copy will say well, 2 pages ago you said it was Wednesday morning,
Yeah.
and now it's 2 days later, so it should really be Friday morning. I don't do that. We go through, so it comes back from the copy editor, we give it back to the author goes through, copy editor's made all these, not changes, but has raised all these queries. The author goes through and says yes, no, whatever, makes the changes. Then it comes back, and then it gets set into pages. Now it looks like a book. Goes out to a proofreader, does the same thing all over again, goes through it all over again. Makes notes like, hey, this is misspelled, or hey, there's a problem with the plot here. Hopefully by then there's not a lot of plot problems. That goes back to the author again. Author again says yay or nay to the changes. Then that's it. Then it's going to be a book. And then yet, despite all that, there's still mistakes that creep in.
Of course.
Infuriating that happens, but it does.
Yeah.
Then there are other. So that's say the first book. I bought 2 books from you. So now the second book, obviously, you haven't written because you wrote that first book, and now I'm going to work with you on the sequel. And that's a little different. It may be some authors to sort of thrash it out ahead of time. They'll call me up and say, hey, I was thinking that, this could happen, or that could happen, or whatever, and we'll talk about it. Some people don't want to do that. Some people are just I have an idea, I'm going to go ahead with it. They'll tell me about it. I mean, they don't usually plow ahead without saying, it's here's what I'm going to do. Okay, sounds good. And the process starts all over again. The new manuscript. That to me is the fun part, is talking about the books, talking about what you're going to do, where you're going to go. Sometimes, don't kid myself, it's the authors who do all the work, but sometimes I give a little thought. The time, I will say, I'm going to use an author's name, Don Bentley, because
I just interviewed him, as a matter of fact.
Stories out of school, but I will tell you this. We're talking about one of his books. He's telling me the plot and everything, and I said, wouldn't it be cool if this character who the natural inclination would be to think this character was the up and up, right? It'd be cool if there was at one point your protagonist thought, what, that guy did disappear for 5 minutes. I wonder what happened in those 5 minutes. Remember being in the phone call with Dante, I was like, God, that would be great. So what would happen in those 5 minutes? And I said, no idea. That's for you to figure out.
That's just my idea.
I just propose these things. I don't have to figure them out. That's you.
You got to fill in the blanks, my man. We're paying you.
Right.
But you hit on something very, very critical. I think a lot of authors, some overlook, some are better than others. For example, my World War I historical fiction, I introduced a Browning automatic rifle too early in the book, and I caught it. No, it didn't come out till then. I had to move it back further in the book. You got to catch those things because people will they'll say, "Oh, a P-51 had 31 rivets on the wing. You said there was 32." You've got to be, especially historical fiction, even fiction, because a lot of the fiction comes out of some truth from a technology perspective. When you read, Tom Clancy, you read that stuff and you go, well, that sounds real. I have to tell people my books are fiction because it just sounds like, crazy stuff. But you're right. You got to catch that stuff or somebody else will. Credibility.
And they'll come back at you. For sure.
Oh, that's credibility too.
Yeah.
So it goes into the copy, then it goes to formatting. Then you send out some ARC copies, whoever, and then they read it and you come back. Matter of fact, I'm about to put out my review of Don Bentley's new book.
Capture and Kill. Sure.
Yeah. His podcast. His podcast is going out tomorrow for the book. Yeah, but it's a good book. It's good. It's really good.
Sure it is. He's a great writer. Great writer.
What's your favorite part? I don't want to say what's your favorite author. So I would say, what's your favorite part of the book? Is it reading that initial manuscript and going, oh man, this is cool. This is a good story, or what's your favorite part?
My favorite part is discussing it with the author. Whether it's having read, whether it's a brand new author or just read your first draft or your first manuscript, or whether it's like someone like Mark Rainey, who I've done I think 20 books with, and discussing. He sent in the draft of the next book, and discussing. I remember something that Quick Entry did, a couple books ago. This reminds me of that. Whatever. I always say it's like on a book club, except it's just me and the author.
Okay.
I think that's super cool. It's so much fun. Not necessarily thrash things out because most of the time the authors have got it all figured out themselves. But it's just so much fun to just read something and then be able to talk to the person who created it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
You're talking directly to the author about whatever. What motivated you to do this? Why did you decide to have him do that? Why did you, And most of my authors, what I love about most of my authors is that they're the same wavelength with me, and that I hate predictability. I hate, stereotypes. One of the things. Can I tell you about one of my favorite? This has nothing to do.
You may talk about whatever you want.
I read them, but I had nothing to do with editing them. But do you know the thriller books by it's Alison Trevor, but Adam Hall. He writes them as Adam Hall. Cool thing about the thriller books, thriller like a James Bond kind of character, right? They said this unknown, I don't remember the name of the agency, but some unknown British agency sends them out on these missions. In every book, he goes out and he's a typical stereotype, the guy in the field, those idiots back in the office, they don't know what they're talking about. You can see that they sent me to do blank, and that's not what needs to be done. This is what needs to be done, blah blah blah. And in every book, he reaches a point where he realizes they set him up. They actually wanted him to do what he's gonna do. They knew that basically he's such a contrarian that if they'd said to him, "You should go out and assassinate the Prime Minister of Moldova," he wouldn't do it. When he got there and they told him, "No, we don't want you to do that. We want you to do this other thing," at some point he'd be like, "Prime Minister has to go."
I gotta kill this guy.
It's so funny that he realizes he's been played in every book, and I just love that. I was because the thing is the stereotype of not in books so much. Books are really, let's be honest, more sophisticated than movies. I say it's true. Stereotype in movies is always oh, the guys back in back in Langley don't know what the hell they're doing. They're blah, blah, blah. But,
right.
Reality, I don't know much about Langley, but I assume that, those guys were in that position at one point until they moved into the office back in Langley. So.
Exactly.
They're really idiots. They just have a different picture than you have.
I tell you, when I read Hunt for Red October, I was in the Army at the time, and I read it. Man, when I was done, I called the Navy recruiter, and I'm like, man, I want to go in the Navy. Until they said, well, you lose a rank or so, and I'm like, nah, I'm good. It was, that was probably one of the pivotal books, and I think in literature.
It definitely was.
I think that from a genre perspective, it was really captivating, and still is. I mean, look how many books have come after that with the same character per se. So that's really good.
It is because why did I reread it recently? I reread it for some reason. I reread it recently. I was going to be on a panel where we were talking about it. And I honestly hadn't read it in like, I don't know, 25 years or something.
Yeah.
And it still held up. I was like, holy smokes. It's very old technology by our standards now, but in terms of like a tale, it really still holds up.
Yeah, it was very good. Have you ever read a book and you go, oh, this is going to crush it. Then all of a sudden you're like, it didn't crush it.
Yes. Fortunately, that happens a lot. It happens a lot. Yeah. I don't know why. I couldn't put my finger on it. Like, I'll read a book and think like, this is the one, man, this is great. And in the book's still great. It doesn't change the book it's not just for whatever reason, just didn't hit at the right time. It didn't hit the right audience. Maybe we screwed it up. Maybe we put the wrong cover on. I don't know. But, sure, that happens all the time. And it's very depressing because you're like, oh, man, this was so good.
Yeah. So do you consider yourself to maybe some newer authors? I don't know if you get the newer authors, but as almost from a mentoring perspective of how to put their written words into a selling book. From that perspective, or are you just looking at that I'm here to help them be successful?
I don't think I'm a mentor. I really don't. I don't think I'm in the sense of not a writing teacher. I don't really.
We do write something every day.
Yeah, I do. I'm not a writing teacher. I don't listen to. I don't want to sound like a jerk, but like I don't like go so much with my gut. It's like I like this or I don't like this. It's not like really feel like the protagonist should be like more. But that I don't know. I just don't.
No, you got a gut feeling.
Yeah, I just don't get into like that stuff, and I don't get into. So I'm not a writing teacher, so to some degree, obviously, the big editorial suggestions, but so just find the best writers I can. Do again, go back to Don Bentley. He would say this too. When he came to us, he had no social media, none.
Right. That's important.
Marketing people really worked him through it. Now he's like the king of social media.
Yeah.
So I will, in terms of, while I'm not like a word for word writing teacher, will work with an author to say like, no, I don't think you should follow this up with that story. I think you should think about a different story or go a different way, or within a story say, I don't think that this works. I think it would be better if it had a more positive outcome or something. I don't know, just in that regard, yes, but I'm not, I don't feel like I'm a mentor. I mean, most of these guys.
Almost like a coach, though, sort of
maybe
coaching perspective.
Yeah, that might be a better way to put it. So I'm not like, I might be teaching you some of the little techniques, but I'm not like, you come to me already, 6'5", 240, and can run 40 and whatever.
Exactly. I think they're more of a coach. Get them to over that finish line. They've got a product. They're on the field. They're playing. But you said something critical too, and I've talked to 100 authors or so. Marketing, right? The brand awareness, the social media. You've got to get out there and be the book, or be who you want that book to be, or your books to be. And that's hard for a lot of authors because they don't like.
It is. So let me go into my little rant, not rant,
yes,
positive thing. I think this is the best time ever to be an author. I really do. When I started 40 years ago, your options were you're going to be published by a big publisher or a small publisher. The story, right? Like it was really. I mean, there might have been a little bit of self-publishing, but basically, You could get a book printed, but what were you going to do with it? Drive around in your car and sell it out of the trunk? I mean, you could.
Right.
There were people who maybe were able to make some kind of deals with local bookstores or something. But, there was no Kindle. Obviously, there was no Kindle. There was no Kindle Direct. There was no, Patreon. There was no whatever,
Yeah.
So you couldn't really do anything. Now you can do all sorts of things. You can publish, it's on a thing with so I was listening to a podcast, and this person had created their own world, fantasy world, and
Mhm.
then other authors came in and wrote in the world. I don't
Well,
remember
that's
where
pretty
they
cool.
published it. Yeah, I don't remember where they published it, but it was published online or something. I was like, well, that was super cool. I've
Yeah.
never even done that. So it's like really anything you want to do, you could do. The question is, we always call it discoverability. You know, there's so much stuff out there. It's how do you stand out? And
Yeah.
that's the question. And that's what you're talking about is like trying to get your stuff noticed. It's a lot of work, on the same, you can hire people. You can hire freelance marketers
Oh,
and
yeah.
freelance publicists. I'm sure it costs a fortune. I literally don't know how much it costs,
Yeah.
but I assume it costs a lot.
Yeah.
But it's all possible. I mean, really anything is possible these days. And also because you only have to sell to a smaller audience, you can afford to do like stuff that like we would be like, well, it's too small an audience. We wouldn't be interested in that.
Right. Yeah. You're right. You gotta, everybody has a, finite amount of money. So if you're, self-published, then, where do you put those dollars to get the maximum effect? Is a book going to be a slow burn, right? And then it takes somebody that has some presence, says, oh, that's a good book. And then that kind of the catalyst to get it going. Then you got to have something to follow it up.
Right. That's the thing. You pat yourself on the back and you're like, oh, great. Now I got to write another book. Yeah.
I got to write another one. I mean, you have to do that. Like I started writing thriller, suspense, espionage type, but I wrote two of them. Then I said, oh, I was 50,000 words into the third book, and I had an idea for my World War I book, and I stopped. I devoted 100% of my time to that because I think the story is so good. I got it out. Then I'm like, okay, what do I do? So I'm writing another one, historical fiction. So I like to learn that stuff. It's interesting, do that sort of thing. The market is probably not, the biggest market, but I'm retired now. I'm good.
I hear what you're saying. Historical fiction, that's tough because
Yeah.
you can't you got to study everything. You can't just it's not just whatever.
Yeah. So I became somewhat of an amateur World War I historian, which that's kind of cool. I mean,
Well,
especially around the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. That's what I've kind of the whole process. That's kind of cool. But so what advice would you give an author? Do you say a new author recommend, hey, get an agent or go find an indie or a hybrid, but then you got to be careful, or self-publish. That's a lot of work.
a lot of work. Oh, starting with the very first thing. The very first thing I say is write your book. Don't when I talk to writers groups, I'll say to them, look, any question is a valid question. There's only one bad question, and the bad question is for you to say to me what's selling. Because if you come to me and say like what's selling, and I say, which would be true today, romantasy is selling. Romance, fantasies with the romance. Romantasy is selling. You say like great. You go home and you're not interested in romantasy. You go home, you
Right. Yeah.
back it out, blah blah blah. You meet me here next year and say I wrote my romantasy, and I can almost guarantee you I'll be like, well, no one's interested in those anymore. Now the market has moved on from romantasy. So
I give you a perfect example of that, Tom. So I drove Uber for about 9 months because I wanted to check it out. On the app, it'll say, oh, this is, you'll be over, I live in Dallas. You'll be over across town. But over here, this is a hot spot. This is where you're going to get the maximum out. So you drive over there. And by the time you drive over there, it's not there anymore. It's where you were. It's where you were initially. I mean, so that's so true. Write what you want to write. Write your story. Don't worry about
right
the market because the market fluctuates.
what you want to write. write what you love, write the story you're comfortable with, write the story that you have to tell, and then, the market will come to you or they won't come to you, or, but I guarantee you a better chance of being successful writing something that comes from your heart than just trying to sit down and say, like, okay, I'm going to gauge the market and go with it. That's almost always a recipe for disaster. Okay,
That is so true. That is absolutely 100% correct.
I
So true.
couldn't be more emphatic about that. All right, so
Right.
now you've done that, right? So you've written the book you
Okay.
want to write, whatever it is. And then I always would say get an agent. Now I know it's easy for me to say because it's almost as hard to get an agent as it is to get published, but I've been doing this for almost 40 years. If I wrote a book tomorrow, I would get an agent because your book's going to get read faster, be taken more seriously, and also agent is supposed to tell you what the market is. It's supposed to say, okay, but now that you've written this book, I want to send it to Tom. Or maybe don't send it to Tom. Maybe send it to Christine, or maybe send it to Kate or somebody else at the house. That's what the agent's for. Also, no, maybe don't send it to Berkeley at all. Maybe just send it to Putnam, or maybe send it to Button or somebody. I mean, that's what the agent's for. On the other hand, decide like right off the bat, like I don't want to do that. I want to self-publish. Don't need an agent to self-publish. Don't know that much about self-publishing. I mean, obviously people do it, are wildly successful at it, I'm very happy with it. But I don't want to give bad advice to people because I really don't know that much about it. But, it has its pitfalls, and the main pitfall is that you got to do all the marketing and publicity, or you hire someone to do it. And, you got to do that while you're trying to write, your next book.
Yes.
But, maybe that's something that a lot of people are very happy with that. They like the total control. They like to be able to say, like, covers exactly what I wanted. The marketing plan is exactly what I wanted. Okay, great. Like, if that's what you want, see, that's to me what makes this the best time to be an author is you could total control. You could have control, of control. It's whatever you want.
Yeah, that's just true. I mean, you have to look at the benefits. So, you weigh them out and say, okay, I want to go this route or this route from a long-term perspective. Or do I put a book out self-published to get a name out, and then to the next book, do I get an agent?
Nice. One thing say one thing, but the other thing I would always say, don't do this for money. Don't like.
No,
Lord knows.
You have to not like money to do this.
If you go into this thinking like I'm doing this because I want to make cash, you're kidding yourself. So
I get to
just make a living at this. It's ridiculous.
I get the best pleasure by doing book signings and people buy something that I wrote. And then they come back when they see again, they go, oh man, this is marvelous. This is fantastic. Right? Or either. But to me, that gives me, if you're, you have to not like money to write books because you're going to spend some. And no matter what. Jack Carr done very good because that's a brand, right? He is a brand. That's different things and marketing, and it's everything that you got to be able to do. So I agree. You got to pick out what you want to, pick out what you want to do for yourself, and then run with it. Go for it. Always.
I also say that, like, the other thing that I think is worth thinking about is even if you don't end up publishing in any way, shape, or form, you still have a very interesting. So my father-in-law died. Didn't realize he had taken some creative writing courses. We found some stuff. It was not like something that you would ever publish. It wasn't even really long enough. But it was really cool to find these stories he had written, and we read them, and we were like, oh wow, it's really cool. So I mean, there's that too. It may just never leave your house, but your children, grandchildren, or whoever might read this stuff someday and say like, oh wow, I didn't know that Grandpa thought that way. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I've written one poem in my life, and it was for my granddaughter who had leukemia. I won't write another one, and she has it. But that's hers.
That's very nice.
Because it came to me, right? I could shoot. I'm trying to rhyme something with orange. See if it's possible.
That.
Yeah, I think that's impossible.
Yeah, it is impossible.
Well, Tom, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Yep.
I really want to thank you. That's some great advice. So the bottom line is, folks, if you want to write something, write it. Then worry about what you do after you write it. You know, figure out what you want to do, but get that thought out there. Everybody has a story, and you can write that story. Just write your story. Again, don't try to follow the market trends, because by the time you get done, there's going to be something else. You're going to be aggravated with yourself. So just write a story and let people buy that story. Excellent, Tom. I appreciate it. Thank you,
Thank you so
sir.
much for having me, Ted.
Yes, sir. Thanks.